Are you listening? Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And welcome into another episode of the Damn Podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network and powered by BeaverBlitz.com. I'm your host, Carter Bahns. I'm joined, as always, by BeaverBlitz.com publisher Angie Machado,
Woo!
who just loves technology. We love technology on the Damn Podcast. Here we are. We're trying this again. We had some technical difficulties on the YouTube live stream a couple of minutes ago. I think we're all good to go now.
You sound good now, Carter. You
okay,
sound
good.
It was really bad. And I know
yeah.
a couple of our listeners responded. At first I thought it was my earbuds, but no, it was definitely your end. But a couple glitches. I think we're good now. Then I couldn't get back on. We're good. I can see you. I can hear you. We are good to go.
We've had audio cut out. We've had Angie unable to enter the studio. We're all over the place today, which, as Angie just said before we hit the record button, we're not off to a great start for Montana State week. These are the weeks where you want everything firing on all cylinders because you don't want to let down. And we just started things off with a 5-yard penalty, a false start of our own on the Damn Podcast. So if you're watching us live on YouTube, I see a bunch of you have found our new link. Thanks for hopping over. If you're on the podcast side, if you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts,
you have no idea.
What are you guys talking about? Well,
we were 20 minutes late here.
trying to get everything set up. So thanks for joining us on YouTube.
Clean this up. You got to clean this up before Pac-12 starts.
Yeah. Hey, this is it's still preseason for
right.
for podcasters too. But thanks for joining us live on YouTube. If you're watching us, thanks for listening to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, you name it. We're on there. But as I just mentioned, it's Montana State week. So Oregon State is heading up to Portland on Saturday. It's Thursday, September 15th now. So we're 2 days away from Oregon State's voyage up to Providence Park, where it's going to host Montana State in kind of a quasi home game. It's, I know that it states in the game notes that it's a neutral site game, but this counts as a home game for the Beavers. So I don't really know what to call it. I'm calling it a quasi home game, but Angie and I will both be there for Beaver Blitz. We'll be up in the press box at Providence Park. So Angie, I got to ask you, how excited are you to take in the atmosphere up there in Portland?
Oh, I'm so super excited. I have not been to the new Providence Park since it's been more of an MLS soccer stadium. So I'm excited to see the atmosphere and the game day. And then how exciting that it's a sellout, over 25,000 Beaver fans, or fans, I guess I should say, probably some Montana State fans in the mix. Excited to see just the atmosphere and seriously, the Beavs are 2-0. It doesn't get much better than that.
We're going to break down that matchup here on today's episode of the Damn Podcast. Unfortunately, we don't have a guest with us on this Thursday like we normally do when we are trying to preview these games and get some insight on Oregon State's upcoming opponents. But we're going to do our best to cover all of the key storylines and take a deep dive into Montana State here with just the two of us. We'll provide some news from Corvallis throughout the week. Jonathan Smith's press conference on Monday, unfortunately, came with some bad news on the injury front. We'll get to that. We'll talk about what Oregon State can gain from this. Normally when you go up against an FCS team, you're just playing not to lose. What can the Beavers accomplish up in Portland? We'll provide an offensive and defensive key to the game. And then if we have time after all of that, I want to touch on some questions that we got from Twitter. We'll do a little Q&A. I sent out a tweet before we went live.
Are we going back to some damn questions?
I didn't brand it as damn questions, but this could be the first of our new season of damn questions. So we'll get into that, assuming we have time at the end. But as we start to preview this game against Montana State, obviously, as we just mentioned, it's in Portland. It's at Providence Park, which, Angie, you said you haven't been there since it's been reconfigured into a soccer stadium. So I'm curious, when was the last time you were there? I assume it was before it was called Providence Park then.
Yeah.
Was it PGE? Was it Geldwen?
I think it was, it was 2005 when the Beavers had the spring game up there when they were redoing the last time they were renovating Research Stadium. The spring game was held up, and I think it was PGE Park at the time, maybe Geldwen. I think it was PGE. So maybe that was a soccer field. I don't know. I had a brand new baby. I think Luke was about 2 weeks old, decked out in his Beaver gear, and I was on maternity leave, but showed up and got to pass the baby around a little bit. So that was the last time I was there.
Back in 05, it still at that point would have been a multi-use stadium. The Portland Beavers, of course, there from the minor league baseball side of things, and then the Timbers were using it for their not yet MLS games. They were still in a lower division there, but I've been there a handful of times over the last few years. I try to make it a goal of mine to go to a Timbers game every year.
A goal?
But I'm haven't made it up there this year in 22, but of course we'll be there on Saturday. So the new side of that stadium, with it's got the lower bowl that has been there since 2012 or whatever, when the Timbers joined MLS, and it has an upper deck and a couple of upper decks actually now on that side too, which are just incredible and have increased the capacity there to just over 25,000, which I think is going to provide for a pretty fun atmosphere for a college football game.
Oh, I can't wait. I think it'll be fun and just a chance for those Portland fans that make that pilgrimage to Corvallis so many times during a year to have a game that's a little closer to home.
I do think we're going to see a decent Montana State turnout at this game. So it sold out yesterday. Oregon State announced that no tickets were available on the primary market. So 25,000 plus tickets have been sold. But I think we're going to see a decent amount of those be Bobcat fans, just because, it's a Pacific Northwest school. It has a pretty decently sized alumni base, particularly in Portland and Seattle. You see a lot of the graduates of that school come a little further west. In fact, one of my friends just graduated from Montana State last year, and he's working in Seattle now, trying to get him down to the game on Saturday. So we'll see there. But I think, hearing what Montana State head coach Brent Vegan said, I think we're going to see a lot of blue and gold there. Yeah.
And I can't even believe how many friends of mine that I went to Oregon State with who now have kids that are going off to and choosing Montana State. So I know 2 that are going to be freshmen at Montana State. So their families are coming up and meeting their kids, and they'll be probably wearing the wrong colors, but that's okay.
Regardless of how many Montana State fans are there, I think we're going to see a pretty comparable number of fans wearing orange and black to what we saw in week 1 down at Reser, because the capacity at Reser right now with the Completing Reser Stadium project going is, I believe it's capped just above 27,000, 26,000. So, you look at a 25,000 seat stadium in Portland, and it's basically the same. It'll just be a little more encompassing because you'll have seats on all 4 sides, unlike at Reser right now, where it's just coming from the one side and the 2 end zones. So I think it's going to be loud. I think there's going to be a ton of energy. I think it's going to be a fun atmosphere. This stadium is 95 years old, but it's been renovated, so it still feels pretty new. And part of that stadium is only 10 years old at the oldest. So I think the Beaver fans that make the trek up to Portland from the metro area, from Corvallis, or the ones who stay there, who live downtown and normally make the trip down to Corvallis, I think they're in for a nice treat as the Beavers play their first game in Portland since 1986.
What's going to be interesting too is now that it is an MLS stadium and it's only an MLS stadium. I know when Oregon State officials made their site visit back this spring, there's not a lot of sideline room, and so that's going to be something to watch. Not a lot of room past the end zone, not a lot of sideline room. So that extra room where guys might be able to run out of bounds is not going to be there with this stadium.
Yeah, we'll see how that plays out. It is going to be a very unique setup, and I'm curious to see how they how they get some of those logistical pieces set up. I think about the sidelines, and I'm like, well, are they going to put both teams on one sideline? Is there room for 2 teams on opposite sidelines? We'll see. It's been a while since Portland State has played there. Of course, another Big Sky team, Montana State, has played Portland State in Portland before, so they're familiar with the city. Oregon State, not so much. As I said, it's been almost 40 years now since the Beavers played in Portland, after it was an annual tradition for a long time. So good for Oregon State, I think, to get back up and play in front of maybe a different subset of its fan base and alumni base. But Montana State coming in, this is not your average FCS team. And I know Arizona fans are saying the same thing about North Dakota State this week. It feels more like let's say Oregon State playing maybe a bottom tier Mountain West team than it does playing an FCS team. I mean, Montana State's coming off of a 12-win season. It was the national runner-up, went to the FCS national championship game down in Texas against North Dakota State and lost. But the Bobcats are coming off of two 10-plus win seasons, and I think they're looking to get back to the national championship game this year. So, Angie, just your initial thoughts on this team and what kind of challenge Oregon State is facing against a lower tier, lower subdivision opponent.
Well, I mean, if you guys watched some football last weekend, we saw what some Sun Belt teams did to some Big Ten programs. We've seen what lower division schools, and we've seen it at Oregon State. The toughest part about this matchup, and anytime you play a Big Sky or a lower division, is Beaver fans are going to expect, I mean, there's not going to be any amount of points that the Beavers can score. And there will be some subset of Beaver fans that think they should have scored more. They could go out and score 70, and there'll be a group of Beaver fans that think they should have scored more or shouldn't have allowed Montana State to score as many points as they did. So it's kind of there's a no-win playing a game like this. I do like Oregon State, just their mentality right now, because I think coming off that big win against Fresno, I don't see the same. I mean, we've talked a lot about, could this be a letdown game? Could this be a trap game? Because then they have USC next week. I don't see that with this team. Carter, do you? I mean, they seem so focused, so dialed in. I don't see this being a letdown game.
No, in years past, when Oregon State has lost to Eastern Washington and Sacramento State, those teams have had their own shortcomings, and that's not to say that this year's team is perfect, but I just think that the culture in the Valley Football Center this year is one that is not going to allow this team to overlook anybody, regardless of the subdivision of D1 football that they play at. You mentioned, Oregon State fans clamoring for more against FCS teams. I think back to 2012 against Nicholls State when Oregon State won, I believe 77-3 in that game. And I remember some people saying, well, why couldn't we have shut them out?
Shut them out. Yeah.
Like, well, you won by 74 points. What more can you ask for?
Yeah.
I don't think Oregon State's going to run away with this thing. I think Montana State will be able to score at least once or twice. I don't think that Oregon State's going to put up 70. So I'm curious to see how Beaver Nation reacts to this, because it shouldn't be particularly close, and I don't expect it to be, but you're not going to see the same score that Oregon just posted against Eastern Washington. I mean, this Montana State team is just too good. And if you need an example of why, I mean, look at recent history. The Bobcats have been to the second round or better of the FCS playoffs in each of the last 3 full seasons. All 3 of those actually ended against North Dakota State. So the Bison are somewhat of an Achilles heel for Montana State. But last year, Montana State went to the FCS National Championship, lost there. 2 years ago, it was in I believe the semis of the FCS playoffs. The week or the year before that, they were in the quarters. So, I mean, this is a program that is consistently winning 8 to 12 games, consistently getting deep into the playoffs, and is boasting some of the best talent at the FCS level, which most recently just led to a handful of guys making NFL rosters. So there's NFL talent in this program, and I think that is what's particularly scary about playing an FCS team of this caliber. It's, you're playing against some guy who could play on Oregon State's team. Yeah.
And is Jeffrey Manning, remind me, is he still on the roster?
Yes, he is. Okay. So I've got this a little further down in the rundown, but we can touch on this here. So Jeffrey Manning, he's playing a safety defensive back. I can't remember exactly what position he's at in the secondary down there, or up there in Bozeman. But he played 16 games at Oregon State. He was here for 3 years, picked up a bunch of tackles. I think he intercepted a pass or two with the Beavers, and then transferred to Montana State where he's really flourished. And, oftentimes we see some of the guys who aren't necessarily getting the playing time they want at Oregon State go down to FCS, whether it's Montana State, Portland State, and really make a name for themselves. And that's what Jeffrey Manning has done. He was an All Big Sky honorable mention last year, had 34 tackles, 4 interceptions, and in 15 starts last year, entering his final year of college football. I'm sure he's excited to go up against his former team.
It'll be fun to see him. He was a good one.
That highlights, that's one of the many players who are key contributors to a Montana State defense that has led this team to new heights recently. So let's look at the first 2 results of Montana State's season this year. Bobcats are 2-0 to start the year. I don't know what stands out more to me, whether it's that defense allowing 15 points per game across 2 games, or if it's the offense putting up 51.5. I mean, the margin of victory for Montana State, and I know it's not playing high-level competition yet. It hasn't started Big 12 play, but the numbers that team is putting up on both sides of the ball are pretty impressive. So a 40-17 win over McNeese State opened the year, and then 63-13 last week in Bozeman against Morehead State. Those are 2 pretty lopsided wins right there.
Yeah. So the Beavs are going to have their work cut out for them. I don't want people to overlook this team and think this is going to be a cakewalk by any stretch of the imagination.
You look at the scores and you think, okay, well, let's dive deeper into it. Let's see how they're getting those points and how they're limiting their opponents to 15 points a game. Well, this Bobcat offense, Angie, what if I told you it's averaging 564 yards per game? And what if I told you that 325 of those are coming on the ground?
Well, I tell you that Oregon State's defense better be ready.
Yeah. There's athletes at all of the different skill positions on that roster. I mean, you're going to see receivers running the fly sweep. You're going to see multiple quarterbacks running the ball and running the ball well.
They do a 2 quarterback, don't they? They use 2 quarterbacks?
Yes and no. I think part of that is just because their margin of victory has been such that they're pulling the starter for
Tommy Mellott, right?
Yeah, Tommy. I believe it's Mellott.
Mellott.
I guess we'll find out on Saturday, but I will admit I haven't watched a ton of Montana State film.
Okay, so Carter, then you tell me that the offense is putting up 564 yards. What if I were to tell you that the Montana State defense is limiting opposing offenses to only 281 yards per game?
I'd tell you that my research is paying off there. Put that number in the rundown and Angie pulls it out like it's her own stat. How about that? No,
I didn't get this far for being dumb, Carter.
281 yards per game defensively is impressive. I think that's about the mark that Oregon State posted in week 1, actually. And we were clamoring about how good Oregon State's defense looked in that game against Boise State. So obviously to see Montana State do that on a 2-game sample size, it's proving that it wasn't a fluke to do it in week 1. So this team, the Bobcats, are averaging 15 points per game against through 2 games this year. And you look at the quality of opponent they're playing and you say, okay, well, this team's probably shouldn't be scoring a ton of points on them. So I'm going to throw this one back at you, Angie.
Oh,
the entire 2021 season, this is 15 games, mind you, because they advanced so far into the FCS playoffs. Montana State allowed 15 points per game all year last year. So this is a 17-game sample size now. The last 17 games, Montana State has only given up 15 points per game. Does that concern you at all?
It does,
for Oregon State's offense.
I mean, that sample size, I don't have their schedule pulled up, but that's obviously playing a couple, payday games as well in there. Right. So, I mean, I think Oregon State's going to have their A game. They're not going to be able to maybe, think they can just show up and walk away with a win. So, it scares me a little bit too with Luke Musgrave out, and we'll talk about the Beavs here in a little bit. But hopefully, I mean, and again, I guess we'll talk keys of the game, but this is a game I feel that Oregon State really needs to get that running game established.
Yeah, you mentioned the payday games, and last year Montana State went to Wyoming and only lost by 3. I want to say the final score of that game was 19-16, or something really ugly like that, where Wyoming probably goes in and says, "All right, let's beat this team by 28 and get out of here." And sure enough, they're winning by a field goal in a really ugly game where there were a lot of field goals kicked. If I had to assume, looking at that score. So this is Montana State's first payday game Since that season opener last year in 2021, it concludes the non-conference schedule for both teams here. And you look at the payday that Montana State's getting to come to Portland, $675,000, which, interestingly enough, this is a coincidence and it's a scary one. $675,000 is the exact figure that Montana got last year to go to Seattle and beat Washington. So a coincidence. Hopefully it doesn't, produce the same result, but $675,000 to go beat an FBS opponent. That worked out pretty well for Montana last year. Montana State's probably thinking, hey, why not us?
I mean, that's so rude. We just paid you $675,000 to come beat me at home. It's supposed to be my homecoming game.
Hey, Appalachian State just made $1 million to go beat Texas A&M. Georgia Southern made $1 million to go fire Scott Frost. I mean, these payday games are, as Oregon State fans are aware, and as you and I are certainly aware, they're no gimme for.
No. How about App State, by the way? They took North Carolina the week before to the wire.
Yeah, that's a good program down in the Sun Belt. So the news that came out of Bozeman this week mostly has to do with injuries, and I think it's very similar to what we heard in Corvallis from Jonathan Smith this week. So the news in Bozeman, and this is concerning for the Bobcats. I mean, this could end up being absolutely problematic for this offense. Bobcats are without 4 running backs this week. So, I mean, think about Oregon State's depth. What would we be saying if Oregon State was down 4 running backs? Well, we're like, well, it's a good thing that they have 5 on the 2 deep, I guess. But, Montana State rolling with 63 scholarships doesn't have the same depth that Oregon State has. And so when you say, all right, well, your top 4 running backs are out, I don't really even know how you begin to approach that.
Yeah, how do you
as an
even
FCS school?
You better hope you have a Jack Coletto on the team that can come back and play for you.
I guess that's where their mobile quarterbacks come into play quite a bit too. But looking at the names of some of the guys who are missing this weekend's game in that running back group alone, I mean, this is striking. So Isaiah Fonse had knee surgery. He was an All-American last year. He's actually coming off of setting the single season rushing record at Montana State. He posted, I believe it was just under 2,000 yards on the ground last year. He was on pace to set the career record as well, but is going to miss a few more weeks after having that knee surgery. So the fact that he is not on the field this weekend, Oregon State has to consider that a massive win, because that's just, I mean, a heck of a weapon that the Bobcats are going to be without.
Huge.
Kagan Williams is out with a neck injury for the year. I believe he suffered that in fall camp. He's wearing a neck brace up there for Montana State. Jared White with a lower leg injury could also be out for the year. Lane Summer, it's more of a short-term injury with his elbow. But I mean, like I just said, that's 4 guys right there. Your entire depth chart is unavailable.
I mean, can you imagine? I mean, Oregon State, like you said, we have 5 on the 2 deep, but if you had 4 of them gone,
things get scary real quick. So for Montana State, it's going to be Elijah Elliott starting at running back. He's actually a Portland native. I believe he went to Central Catholic. So I'm sure he'll be fired up to get the opportunity in this homecoming game for him. I don't have a scouting report on him, but I know that Montana State's going to look to establish him right away because he is the option in the running game. Like I said, outside of the mobile quarterbacks.
It's something to watch, definitely.
The injury bug is not just limited to the offense up there in Bozeman. A couple of defensive starters are out. Cornerback Devin Davis had shoulder surgery and is out for the year. So one of the starters of their pretty strong secondary is out. And then another defensive back in safety, Rylan Ort, failed a drug test earlier on and is in the middle of a 6-game suspension for that. So a handful of key players, that's 2 defensive starters and an All-American running back who are unavailable for Montana State. And man, you talk about the margin of error for a team like the Bobcats going up against Oregon State. It's so slim that, I think you look at the personnel issues and you say, man, that could create some serious problems for Montana State. Definitely.
It's always bad when you have some injuries, but when they're focused like that, where you have 4 running backs and 2 defensive backs out, and when you said, like you said, 63 scholarships, it really will cut into their depth.
They're going to rely on their 2 quarterback system. I think, even again, I said I didn't, keep up with the game flow of their first 2 games, but if this was a situation where Sean Chambers, their Wyoming transfer backup quarterback, came in because the games got out of hand, well, he produced. And so I think, even if he wasn't originally going to be part of the game plan, and, in a close game, or what Montana State hopes to be a close game against Oregon State, maybe you see him come in because he carried the ball 14 times, 150 yards and 4 touchdowns when he was on the field. So I think if you're down 4 running backs, you have to say, well, we got to do whatever we can to get Chambers on the field, because look at what he just did for us in the first 2 games as a backup.
Maybe he comes in as the running back. So
yeah, I mean, you never know. Brent Vegan said they're gonna get creative with their offensive game plan, whether that's throwing the ball more, whether that's getting different guys looks at running back. He obviously wouldn't say, but I'm curious to see what they throw at the Beavers, considering the challenges they're facing personnel wise. Tommy Mellott is the starting quarterback, as we just mentioned a couple of minutes ago. He's the primary guy there, and he's more of the prolific passer. So he's a dual threat option, and he's run for a touchdown or 2, I believe, as well. But you look at his passing numbers, and they're pretty impressive. So 65.6% completion rate. He's 27 of 41. That's very solid. 447 yards on 27 completions is quite efficient.
Yeah.
And then he's got 4 touchdowns to no interceptions. So he's taking care of the ball. He's making plays with his arm and his legs, and he's efficient in all of the above. That's a quarterback that has a potential to lead Montana State's offense against Oregon State's defense.
Like I said, hearing the 2 quarterbacks, if I'm Montana State, I put the backup in as the running back and let him work with his legs and maybe throw some trickeration in there. And I don't want to give them any ideas.
Yeah, if
I'm not an offensive
the Montana
coordinator.
State coaching staff is listening to this, plug your ears. Yeah. But no, I think about the teams Oregon State struggled with in the past. Eastern Washington
Mobile
comes to
quarterbacks.
mind. Some of the teams that cause FBS teams problems on an annual basis, a lot of times it starts with a star quarterback. So, I mean, Vernon Adams at Eastern Washington certainly was a weapon and scored 55 points or something against Oregon State.
Mobile quarterbacks have kind of been Oregon State's Achilles heel for 20 years.
Mm-hmm. We'll see if Trent Bray can dial up a system to contain him, because I think the Beavers did a pretty good job of containing Jay Kaner last week, keeping him in the pocket. Outside of the quarterbacks and running backs, Montana State's offense, again, it's just loaded at the skill positions. So they've got athletic wide receivers and tight ends. You're going to see both of those groups getting involved in the running game. They have quite a few ways that they try to get those guys the ball. Wide receiver Willie Patterson has 3 touchdowns already through 2 weeks, which, that's another impressive mark. They've spread the ball out quite a bit. So I look at the stat sheet and you see like 5 or 6 guys in that receiving core have a touchdown already. And that's impressive, because it just shows you that it's not just one guy that they're looking to get the ball to. It's not like Oregon State can just line Alex Austin up against one guy and say, all right, we shut down your offense. You're going to see linebackers, safeties, you name it, get involved in defending this Montana State passing offense.
Yeah, and that, especially then if you add the mobile quarterback, this is not going to be an easy task for Trent Bray.
Defensively, Montana State, again, like we mentioned, has also caused all sorts of problems for its
15
opponents.
yards or 15 points a game for 17 games.
It's impressive.
Kind of like all you need to know.
That's really impressive stuff. Jeffrey Manning Jr., the former Beaver, is a key part of that. But outside of him, safety / nickel Ty Okada is one of the leaders of this entire team. Callahan O'Reilly at linebacker is another all Big Sky returner. So some veteran guys on a defense that, like we said, was one of the nation's best last year, and so far through 2 weeks this year is one of the best in FCS again.
Callahan O'Reilly. Wow, that makes me want to have a Guinness or something.
I was going to say, it's pretty Irish. I haven't seen any pictures of him, but I'm not sure. I mean, there's some red hair potential.
Callahan O'Reilly. Yeah.
The second half of the show, we're going to talk more about Oregon State, touch on some news from Corvallis throughout the week, talk about what Oregon State can gain from this, and of course, provide our keys to the game. But first, I want to remind everybody listening that BeaverBlitz.com is the place to be throughout Oregon State's football season. The Beavers are off to a 2-0 start, and we're off to a great start at BeaverBlitz as well. Our numbers are through the roof, and we have to thank all of you for helping us reach a new all-time high of subscription numbers, not only on YouTube, but also on BeaverBlitz.com. You're helping us grow, and we thank you for that. And we're doing our best to provide you with the content that you are craving as Oregon State looks to compete for a Pac-12 title. We talked to Jonathan Smith on Monday, and Angie, I want to get your takeaways from his press conference, but for me, nothing stood out more than the injuries.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest, especially when you hear that Luke Musgrave he kind of caught himself. He said he'll be out a couple weeks, and then he kind of caught himself and said, well, this week, and then we'll have to see day to day. I've heard from other sources that Luke could be out a couple weeks. Hopefully that means a couple weeks and he's back ready to go for the 24th for USC coming to town. I guess fingers crossed if you're a Beaver fan there. But Trey Lowe will be out this game. Alton Julian, they said it's day to day, so we'll see if he makes his return or not. Again, day to day, I see, there's Brian Miller asking any word about Alton. He has been practicing more, but he's still somewhat limited. He's not going full, but I don't know. Carter and I have kind of talked about this. I could see him maybe getting in a little bit during Montana State, but I think you want to try to save him if he's ready to go for USC.
Yeah, there's an element of, Oregon State has said Montana State has our full attention, and I don't doubt that. And I'm sure Oregon State is coming at the Bobcats with a full game plan, and they're not looking ahead to USC as big as that game might be. But I do think there's an element of caution here with some of these guys. Could Trey Lowe play this week if he really needed to? Maybe. We don't know. It's possible. Could Alton Julian play this week? He might. Could Luke Musgrave play? It sounds like maybe not.
No.
But I think with some of the guys who are more borderline, like a Julian, it just makes sense to hold them out this week and save them for a bigger opponent. I think Oregon State, even with these injuries to a couple of starters, Musgrave in particular, even with those injuries, Oregon State should have enough to beat Montana State and to do it by a couple of scores. But where it gets really hairy is if Luke Musgrave is out next week against USC, because I think that's a game where if Oregon State wants to have any chance of winning, Musgrave's going to have to be, if not fully healthy, at least on the field and serving as a target in that passing game.
Yeah, exactly. And they're going to need that bigger body. But it's frightening when you look at SC and Utah back to back, and Stanford. You have 3 weeks back to back to back.
Yeah. Brian Miller asks in the YouTube chat, do we think Oregon State could be playing mind games with USC about Musgrave? And to that, I would say probably not. Like Angie said, from what we have heard, this does sound like it could be a multi-week injury. They're not going to go out and say that it is just yet, which tells me that there is a chance he plays against USC. But
even in the lodge, we've had people posting that they've heard a couple weeks. So, and I don't know. We don't know. It looked like a leg, hip potential. Yeah. So we don't know what it is. They haven't discussed that, but
yeah, that's the big one from this week. That's the thing.
But Trey Lowe and Isaiah Newell, I guess he's still a little day to day. They said it was a non-football injury. So
whatever
that is,
whatever that means, that's 2/5 of Oregon State's running back group out. So we talk about Montana State being down 4. Oregon State's got its shortcomings there as well. And I think this is a week where we really want to see Oregon State establish the running game, and to have Trey Lowe and Isaiah Newell out, well, the emphasis is going to be on Deshaun Fenwick and Damian Martinez, and probably a little bit of Jam Griffin as well to get that done. Because I don't think they quite accomplished what they were hoping to last week, even though they did have a little bit more success in that realm. Other interviews from throughout the week. I talked to Jim Holochuk on Tuesday, and I had kind of forgotten. I knew at one point that he had coached at Montana State, but I had forgotten about it until he reminded us on Tuesday, and I don't think I realized even then that he had spent, I believe he said 7 years in Bozeman. So one of the many connections, Oregon State has connections to coaching staffs all across the West Coast, but one of the few that it has to Montana State. Coach Mahalichuk said he's really proud of what Montana State has accomplished since he spent, about 7 years there. When he got there, the Bobcats were coming off of what he said he thought was a 0-win or a 1-win season. And now you fast forward to 2021 and they're appearing in the national championship game and coming off of that now in 2022. It is really impressive what that program has done. And obviously you have to credit Coach M in helping build that program up because we know how impressive and accomplished of a coach he is.
Yeah. And, that's something I think people forget when coaches move on. They still keep tabs on their old team. I mean, I know half the San Jose State coaching staff keeps tabs on the Beavs. A couple of them are still BeaverBlitz members and check in and will text that they're watching and cheering from afar. So that happens everywhere. And it's fun to see.
I also spoke with Jake Overman on Tuesday. Of course, Oregon State's other starting tight end. I put in quotes because it's really only when Oregon State's in 2 tight end sets that we see him out there. But he is listed as a starter. And this week he's going to be tasked with stepping into the tight end 1 role. He's the guy in that group with Luke Musgrave out. And, he said with the experience he has gained learning from Tegan Quatoriano and Luke Musgrave over the last 2 years and playing a decent amount on special teams and catching a pass as a freshman against Arizona State in that final game of the 2020 season. He's had enough time to develop and prepare for this moment. And I think he's really excited to show what he's capable of.
Yeah. Exciting to see him get his chance.
What can Oregon State gain from this game? Angie, we've talked over and over about how this is this might be a potential trap game for the Beavers. This is one that you can't afford to lose. You're paying your opponent so much money to come in. You have to take care of business. All of this is like anti-losing stuff. But obviously, Oregon State has proven and always will prove that it's playing to win. Oregon State's not just looking to go out there under Jonathan Smith and take care of business and beat Montana State by 7 points and squeak this out. No, I mean, Smith proved it himself last week on the final play of the game. He's there to win the game, and I'm sure he's hoping to walk away with a big one here. So if Oregon State is to go and impress and take care of business in strong fashion, what does that look like for you?
I think number one, in my opinion, they need to walk away without any more big injuries. They have to limit injuries because they have probably the toughest stretch of their schedule coming up, and they need as many healthy players as they can get. So to me, that is my key is to limit injuries. But I want to see a win, obviously. I'd love to see them establish a running game and be able to establish that. And also, get some turnovers. We saw 5 turnovers in that first week and then 0 last week. So I'd like to see the defense get some turnovers there, but also maybe do a little more pass rush, sack the quarterback a few more times, just show some domination. So those are kind of my 3 things I'm looking for.
Yeah, I think getting the running game going is my biggest thing. Something that was a disappointment in week 1. I think we saw a minor step forward in week 2, but it wasn't quite efficient enough to say, oh yeah, Oregon State's running game is back. And I think when you're going up against an FCS team, you expect to win in the trenches. You expect your skill position guys to be a little more talented. And this is a week where Oregon State can. I think if it lives up to its potential in this game, you're going to see the running game have a lot more success. And hopefully for their case, they're up by enough points where they don't need to pass the ball and they're just trying to run the clock. And I think that's an opportunity to really pound the rock and focus on the run game there.
Yeah, I agree.
Getting some younger players some action too, if this thing gets out of hand or if it's, comfortable at halftime. Who are some guys that maybe you want to see get a little bit of run this week? Let's say if Oregon State has a 3-touchdown lead in the third quarter and it's looking comfortable and, they're rotating some guys through. Who do you want to see get in there if that's the case?
Well, honestly, I love these types of games for the reason of trying to get some true freshmen, like true, Dylan Lopez, Donaldson, Malaki Donaldson, Gosh, some of these guys, true freshmen, they can play up to 4 games and keep their red shirt. So get them in, let them get some game experience. So I would say basically that entire freshman class, if the lead's comfortable enough, it'd be great to get them some run and let them go out and show their hand a little bit. But yeah, just the younger guys, just let them get in. Maybe we see some Ben Gulbranson. It would be nice to see him and get some game reps there.
Look at last year against Idaho. Sam Vidlak came in for a series or two at quarterback as a true freshman, and put up a couple of completions and I think got a first down or two. And obviously that's good for his early career confidence. And I think if Ben Gulbranson were to get in, it's only his second drive of his career after playing that final one against Arizona State back in 2020. So if you're working towards him being your quarterback in 2 years, this is an opportunity for him to get some action. Bo R in the YouTube chat suggests Easton Mascarenas, John Dunmore, and Madison. If that's referring to Teron Madison, I don't believe he's
not on the roster.
Anymore. But John Dunmore is one. We saw him come in for that trick play against Boise State, and we said, okay, he's making plays one way or another. I'd like to see him get some run in the receiving core if the opportunity arises. But yeah, for me, it's that freshman class. It's the Dylan Lopez's, it's the Melvin Jordans, it's Matthias Milwaukee Donaldson. Those guys who came in as highly rated, highly touted recruits who are just not quite ready to crack the 2 deep, or in some cases they are, but not quite ready to actually get into the rotation on game day. This is a great opportunity to give them game experience against collegiate.
I'd like to see too the second string O line get in and D line, just because I think those guys need the work too.
I think you want to see Oregon State win comfortably with no mid-game letdowns. Play full 4 quarters, get out to an early lead, build on it, and then don't let it up in the fourth quarter. That's generally a pretty positive game script when you're playing against an FCS team, and basically what the Beavers did against Idaho last year, if I remember correctly. I think that was pretty much all right, we got the lead, now let's build on it. And Idaho never really put up much of a fight in that one. Forcing turnovers, getting to the quarterback, I think is an area that, the Beavers last week did a good job of getting to the quarterback. They just didn't finish on it. In week 1, they forced 5 turnovers, but then in week 2, they didn't force any. And so I think putting all of that back together in one game it serves as it would serve as a nice little launching point as you go into conference play to see, all right, well, we just did it again. We don't just have one data point to go off of. Let's move into our keys to the game. I've got mine. I'll let you go first if you have something different from what I have.
I'm just looking at yours. So my offensive key to the game is going to be to establish the run and just pound the rock.
Okay, so different from mine. So
yeah, yours is different. So I want to see control the clock, pound the rock, and really establish. I felt like Fresno State, when you look at the stats, they looked good. It was like, okay, they actually picked up yards, but when you actually were watching the game, it just felt like chunks. It wasn't really coming in any kind of consistent form.
There were 2, maybe 3 runs of like 10 yards. I think Martinez had one and Fenwick had one. But yeah, to your point, no breakaway runs. We didn't see Coletto take it for 41 yards like we did in week 1. And, none of the running backs actually, the legitimate running backs, not, Coletto excluded, none of them have broken free for anything longer than I think 10 to 15. So it would be nice to see them get that going this week. For me, my offensive key is just to limit turnovers, and I'll tell you why. Obviously, that's a point of emphasis every week, but I think it's particularly important in this one because Oregon State's going to be able to move the ball. The Beavers are going to score points against Montana State. 15 points a game is impressive, but Oregon State's just a different animal offensively than a lot of the teams the Bobcats are playing. So I think Oregon State's going to score. It just needs to limit Montana State's opportunities to keep up. And one way that you can do that is to hold on to the ball. You don't want to let the Bobcats get extra offensive possessions. You don't want to, score 21 points and then all of a sudden you're stalling because you just fumbled. or you don't want to go up 14-0, but oh no, we just threw a pick six and now it's a one-score game. Hold on to the ball, keep building up on that score, and just don't give Montana State any chances to keep up with you. Montana State head coach Brent Vigen said that in order to beat Oregon State, they're going to need to force turnovers. He recognizes that the Bobcats are going to need as many possessions and particularly extra. Is that my phone? No, it's your phone.
No, it's me. It's
okay.
I just muted it.
In order to keep up, they're going to have to force turnovers and give themselves opportunities to keep up. And if they're pointing that out as one of their keys to the game, well, one of my keys has to be to counteract that.
Yeah.
We saw Oregon State hold on to the ball last week against Fresno State, and I think it was the difference. Fresno State didn't get any opportunities to build onto their lead. Yeah. I think 9 was as wide as it got. So again, it's a point of emphasis every week, but I think in particular when you're playing an FCS team, it's really important to hold on to the ball. Just
no free chances.
Yeah, exactly.
Defensively, what is your key?
Do you have the same one as me?
Well, kind of. My that I had on my note was to create more of a pass rush, but in hearing more about what you're saying about the quarterbacks, I think it's total legit to contain the QBs, and I think they're kind of similar. Containing them, pass rush, get to the quarterback is the biggest thing.
Yeah, I think even less so than getting to the quarterback this week. This is more of a containment week, and we saw the Beavers do that so well last week, getting pressure but holding the edge. Hainer didn't have opportunities to scramble out of the pocket, and more often than not, he was just forced to get rid of it early. He's a mobile guy. He's actually got some sneaky speed. He just didn't have an opportunity to show that because Oregon State did a great job of holding the edge. And I think against Montana State, a team that wants to use one, if not two quarterbacks and run them a ton, holding the edge and not letting them get outside of the defense. If they're going to beat you with their legs, you want to make them beat you through the pocket, step up and beat you there, because that's where where all of your defenders are. Where Oregon State could get into trouble is if you've got a cornerback leaving his assignment to take the quarterback because he's running down the sideline. Just containing those guys, keeping them in the pocket. I think that's going to be big, especially since with 4 running backs out, I think you are going to see the quarterbacks run quite a bit. I think you're going to see more designed runs.
Yeah. And that's going to be huge. If they can keep them contained to the middle of the field, you cannot have them sprinting down the sideline.
Those are our keys to the game. Limit the turnovers offensively, get the running game going, and then defensively to contain Tommy Mellott and Sean Chambers. We've got about 10 minutes left, so that's it works perfectly. I wanted to get some listener questions, some damn questions, if you will, into this episode, and so we'll consult with Twitter on this one. Angie, I'll throw a couple of questions your way, and I'll touch on some of these as well. But Brian Miller asked a serious question and a fun question, and I think both of these are worthy of some attention. So the serious question is, do you think Jonathan Smith commenting that Luke Musgrave may be out more than a week is playing mind games against USC? We already kind of answered that one.
Answered that one.
The fun question is, if Jack Coletto ends up trying his hand at coaching in the future, what position, coach, head coach, what position, coordinator, whatever, what would his role be on a coaching staff?
He's a smart kid. If you've ever, he already has his mechanical engineering. We're not even talking nothing against the construction engineer management, but because that's hard too, but he's like an ME, tough stuff. Already has his degree. I actually would like to see Jack in the offensive coordinator type role, because I think he's crafty enough to really maybe out scheme some people. He knows offenses really well, being a former quarterback, and he's kind of played every position out there. So I'd say offensive coordinator.
He called his own play on the game-winning play. He went to Jonathan Smith and said, "Hey, I actually like this look better." Jonathan said, "All right," and he scored a game-winning touchdown on it. So yeah, that's got all the makings of an offensive coordinator, right?
He's just one of those smart, cerebral kids that or young men that I think would be suited to be kind of an offensive coordinator. Cerebral, out scheming. I could see it.
but then he has the defensive and special teams expertise to also bring that to the mix. So
I
maybe
know.
you see him
I know.
start his career as an offensive coordinator, work his way up, and then
But think
take a
about
head
how
coaching
deadly
job.
that is. That's just it. Even like as a quarterback, when you have a quarterback that knows defenses too, and
Yeah.
that just helps the way they read. I mean, I think about Mason Moran and never really got a shot at quarterback at Oregon State, but being that he played DB and quarterback, he had some really good knowledge of reading defenses and being able to change plays. I think Coletto, I think I'd love to see him just offensive coordinator help.
Yeah, it's a really valuable trait, and one that I know that the offensive staff uses quite a bit. They say,
He's
"All
just
right,
going to
Jack,
do things.
what are you
So
seeing
yeah,
here?
he,
What's our offense bringing on this play?" And both when he's at practice, they kind of work in tandem with that.
Mhm.
The defensive guys want Coletto to work there because he's a linebacker by trade, and then the offensive guys obviously spend all sorts of time with him because of the Coletto package, and they kind of bounce ideas off of each other in that way.
He's going to do things in life. I'm excited to see where he goes.
Brian Miller also asked a question in the YouTube chat that I don't think we can let slide here. This is a great question and very timely. How are we feeling about Aiden Childs being a 4-star prospect?
I know I was going to mention that. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I was curious, Angie, if you had seen that, because I think that happened. I mean, maybe even today.
Yeah, I think it happened today. I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming potentially when he committed, just because Greg Biggins is so high on him. I'd love to see the other services kind of get with the program, but right now 24/7 does have him rated as a 90, a 4-star. So he's just been doing some great things. I don't know if you guys have followed kind of what he's been doing as a prep with his prep career, but super excited. And how fun is it to watch him cheer the Beavs on from Southern California? And you can tell he's already super excited to be a Beav.
Oregon State's 2023 quarterback commit is now the 17th rated quarterback in the country, according to 24/7 Sports. It's a big time get for Jonathan Smith. We knew it was at the time when he originally committed, but I think you and I both expected him to kind of take off and to see his recruiting ranking, for whatever it's worth, kind of shoot through the moon as his senior year progressed. We'll move back to Twitter here for Rick Scheibner's question. He asks if it's okay to look ahead to USC, and I think because we're not in the Valley Football Center and we're not affiliated with the program, I think it's okay for us to do that. So let's go ahead. They're focusing on Montana State. We're going to look ahead to USC here. He asks, what is a strategy to offset not having Luke Musgrave available next week if he's not able to go against the Trojans? Rick says the passing attack is going to depend on the receiver getting open in the flat, and I agree there. I think you're going to need to see Trayshawn Harrison lock things up as a receiver.
Yeah, I was going to say, we need those guys to catch some balls.
He did a great job of that in the second half, bounced back pretty admirably there. So you want to see him lock things down as the primary guy. He's been competing with Musgrave for the most targets on the team. So I think he becomes your most important guy. And then you'd also rely on Anthony Gould, Silas Bolden, some guys who Angie and I have touted as playmakers. I think you'd rely on them stepping up and being your number 2, number 3 guys. Anything else to add there, Angie?
I think with USC's defense, just their size and speed, I think we see a lot more of the, kind of fly sweep, little bubble screens, just getting the ball into a Silas or an Anthony Gould, getting the ball into their hands and letting them do some things to offset some of that size and speed that USC has, linebacker and DB.
Now, here's an idea, too. Let's think back to 2008. How did Oregon State beat the Trojans back then? I think they ran the ball, like 40 times? Jaquiz Rogers. Yeah, you could see the running game.
Could it be Damian Martinez's breakout game?
Who knows? Just saying. True freshmen have had some success against USC in the past, particularly when the Trojans are ranked in the top 10. Just keep an eye on that. I think that's why it's so important for Oregon State to get the ground game going this week, because if you go into a conference game against a top 10 team without your leading receiver, you better hope that you can move the ball on the ground.
Yeah.
Let's see. Tom Molinari asks, have you heard any word about the Beavs possibly hosting College Game Day next weekend against USC? The short answer is no. Long answer is I know that Nick Daschel at Oregon Live, Oregonian tweeted something and wrote something about Oregon State being on ESPN's radar for that game. I don't know. It's going to take a lot for game day to come out west.
Because that's also Washington State, Oregon, which is another big game if they're going to come west.
Yeah. I don't see it. I think more likely than not, if Oregon State's getting a game day appearance, it'll maybe on the road at Utah.
Yeah.
Maybe at home against Oregon at the end of the year. I think it's just a little early.
I think if they were really truly interested in bringing game day, that ESPN would have taken that USC Oregon State game for their 4:30 or their 12:30 slot, because then the team would have been in place.
That was the telltale sign for me when I saw that game got relegated to the Pac-12 network, and we're going to talk about that a ton next week. That's like going to be half of the podcast rundown. When I saw that, I said, okay, well, there's not a chance game day is coming out, because if ESPN doesn't want to, if ESPN doesn't want to allocate a slot on any of its 3-4 networks to get this game on national TV, why on earth would it, want to come out for game day? So, I just don't see it happening this week, but maybe later on in the year. I wouldn't count it out entirely. We've basically answered this question already. At HMB8404 asks, out of the following 8 young potential impact players, how many of these guys do you want to see? And then he lists 8 guys. And I think we pretty much touched on all of them basically when we said who we might get to see this week against Montana State.
Velling's another one. I totally forgot about him, but tight end, I could see him definitely getting played.
He also lists Takari Hickel, and I think it's still a little early for him.
It's early for him.
But Quincy Wright, maybe, defensive line. I wouldn't count that one out, if Oregon State's blowing out the Bobcats this week. Pat Beaverman asks, will Benny the Beaver be chainsawing the log every time the Beavers score a touchdown like Timber Joey at the Timbers games? I really, really hope so. I would love to see that. But this goes back to what Angie was saying earlier about how there's no room on the sidelines or in the end zones. I don't think there's enough room for that giant log in the end zone. It would be awesome to see Benny Beaver, chainsawing a big chunk of log every time Oregon State scores a touchdown. But I think logistically speaking, more than anything, I just don't know that there's room to put that thing out there.
Okay, Carter, I'll ask the question from Bo Rinker. Would you rather go 8-4 and win the bowl game, or 10-2 and lose the bowl game?
10-2 and lose.
That's me too. Yeah. That's no brainer.
It's a no brainer to me, just because, and I mean, I'm not going to discount the question because I do think it's a little thought provoking. I mean, I just think it's, well, what do you value winning the Holiday Bowl more than you value losing in the Fiesta Bowl? I mean, like, give me a New Year's 6 bowl game any day. I don't care I don't care if Oregon State loses by 50. That's exposure nonetheless. I mean, last year, Oregon State went to the LA Bowl, and I said, I don't care what the Beavers do in this game. This is a win. I just think, if you were to win 10 games and get to a high stakes bowl like that, no matter what happens, I think that's more important than winning a lower tier.
And you have the momentum all season. When you're 10-2, just the momentum going all season, it's huge.
Yeah, I mean, if you're 10-2 going into the bowl game, you're probably a borderline top 10 team. If you're 8-4, you're probably on the edge of the top 25.
Out of the top 25. And recruiting, fundraising, everything's going to be better with a 10-2 and a better bowl game, even if you get blown out.
Primetime TV slots late in the year, college game
more
day.
Money. Yeah, I mean, it's like no brainer.
Yeah. Chantry Star finally asks, if Oregon State's 4-1 after the Utah game, what record would be acceptable at the end of Pac-12 play? And I really like this question, so I saved it for last, just because I think it gives us an opportunity to talk about how Oregon State is already on its way to a pretty successful year. Because when we sat down and we gave our season predictions, we went game by game. I said, all right, Oregon State's got a really tough non-conference schedule. If it goes 3-0, I think the Beavs are an 8-9 win team. If it goes 2-1, I think the Beavs win somewhere between 6 and 8. Well, we're here, September 15th, and Oregon State's 2 days away from potentially being 3-0. I think if you start the season that strong, and if that continues on to 4-1, you're looking at a 9-win team, maybe 10.
And unlike Carter, I went out on a limb and said it was a 10-2 team to begin with. So I did pick a loss. It's Fresno and Utah were my 2 losses. So theoretically, I got an extra loss in there because 10-2, baby, 10-2.
So you heard it here first. Oregon State's going 11-1 because it beat Fresno State.
Well, yeah, I mean, but that gives me a little cushion because USC is looking better than I expected them maybe to look. But I still don't. Their D-line, I think, is suspect. Yeah, we'll wait. We have next week to talk about USC, and we have 2 whole podcasts to talk about USC, or not 2, I guess. But depending on how Sunday night goes, I might have to eke in a little USC talk.
Oh yeah, I think we'll preview that game a little bit. But that's going to wrap this one up. That's all the time we have. Thanks to everyone for sending in Twitter questions. How did we make this
an hour?
Good job. It's because of the Q&A.
The Q&A, I know.
Yeah,
damn questions rock.
People came through for us on short notice. I tweeted that out. So thanks for everyone sending in questions. Thanks for everybody who joined us live on YouTube, even though we had the technical difficulties to begin with. Quite a few of you found us. So thanks for waiting and being patient with us there. Thanks to everyone for listening to us on your favorite podcast app as well. We appreciate your support on that platform too. We're going to be back on Sunday to recap Oregon State versus Montana State. Probably look ahead to USC as well, as Angie said. But until then, you can follow her on Twitter at Angie Machado 1. You can follow me at Carter Bahns, and we'll talk to you again on Sunday for another episode of the Damn Podcast.